This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
And today we are going to be talking about the ClassWallet and homeschool families. And I have a very special guest on the line, and that is Gina Steffy. Welcome, Gina.
Hello. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. And one of the exciting things about us both being here is that we actually work closely together. Gina does a lot of the behind the scenes for the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network and all of our social media, and basically knows a lot more than I do about podcasting at this point, even if I've been podcasting longer than she has. But Gina, you were a homeschool mom, like you're a graduate like I am. And so share with our audience a little bit about yourself and your family that are all grown up now.
They're all grown and doing well. Homeschooling worked well. So I have 4 kids that are, like we said, grown, and my youngest is in his late 20s. We won't say an exact age, but they're all doing well. 2 went on to college and got degrees, and 2 went into the trades. So they're doing well. I loved homeschooling, and what a dream job to be able to work for homeschooling companies, to work for the podcast network, and stay in the homeschool world that blessed our family so much. And I'm a big believer in homeschooling still. So that's pretty much about my family, about my kids. Yep.
Wonderful. And Gina and I have worked to get my company, Media Angels, on the wallet, and in various states. And I think at one point, Gina, my head was on the table trying to answer the questions that you had, and you kept saying it's going to be so worth it when we're done, because from a seller's perspective, it's very intricate. There's a lot of questions you have to ask, and rightly so, because you want a state that's going to be giving money to parents to at least vet these companies to make sure that they exist and they're, at the level or, quality curriculum for homeschooling families that isn't just, garbage that they're recommending. So, from the user's perspective, maybe you're a homeschool mom and you've applied for it through your state and you're doing the same thing. Your head's on the table. You're going, oh my gosh, they're asking me all these questions. And yet, this money can be a blessing. It can be used for all kinds of things, but I'm going to share just what my daughter has done, and she's used it to offset some of her curriculum that she's purchased, as well as using it for in-person activities for the kids. For example, they went to different camps this summer. One was like a junior lifeguard training that they went through, and then there was a basketball camp. And, with so many children, it's difficult to get them all in different camps and to be able to afford that. So it was wonderful to be able to have some money to offset and also buy things like a telescope for your family or musical instruments that the children can use for lessons. So again, it can be a huge savings, not just for curriculum, but for other things. So first, let's start with, what is ESA? What does it mean? And how is it, how do states use this?
Well, I think before we start, I just want to do a little preemptive. I'm not offering any kind of legal advice. I'm not commenting on homeschool freedoms, because there is an ongoing conversation about homeschool freedoms and the use of ClassWallet funds, ESA funds.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read all about that. Quick Google search for Homeschool Legal Defense Association and make your own decision for your family. So we will go through some things you can consider before making a decision to use funds. But what is ESA? It stands for Educational Savings Account, and the state sets aside a chunk of money in an account that you can spend on approved educational expenses, curriculum, tutoring, online classes, therapies, testing, sometimes technology. Think of it as the state saying, here's an allowance for your child's education. But just remember, and this is the head on the table moment, there's a rule book attached.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. And, one of the things when we talk about freedoms, because in a perfect world, I would say, don't do this, don't accept any money because there are going to be requirements at the end of the tunnel. But for others, and I'm also going to throw this out there. I'm probably going to get emails about it, but don't just use it to put your child in a charter school. Um, there may be a season where, parents are ill, you're taking care of some, grandma or whatever that is, where that would be important, but and helpful to the family, similar to, I remember years ago, an online curriculum that was totally K through 12 approached me about sponsorship. And I asked some of my friends, why would anybody want that? And they explained, well, last year I was taking care of an elderly, family member, and that was the only way I could continue homeschooling. So there is, we don't know what the reason would be. But if you're a homeschool mom and you've been homeschooling, and then you get this boon of money and you say, well, I'm going to just put my child in a charter school and then I'm going to go get a job, or I'm going to go volunteer at this school, or whatever that is. That's not, in my estimation, the best use of that money, especially if the idea of this is to enrich your homeschool rather than to, use this as a alternative.
Right.
There are some wonderful charter schools. There's some part-time charter schools out there where the parents still have their children at home and they're homeschooling. And so, as my kids would say, you're a homeschool purist. And I was. And then, as everything changes in your life, the last two children did some dual enrollment. So you could say, well, you homeschooled them K through 12, but then you didn't the last two for 2 years of their homeschool journey. So, it all comes back to what is the season that you're going through? How is it beneficial? And maybe to look at those things
Mhm.
before, we get into the judgy, you know, should you do this? Should you take the money? And this is just for parents who want information. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And
So,
we have a download that they can download,
okay, wonderful.
a guide, and it will walk them through some questions to consider before signing on for their states.
Good.
Yeah, so that can be helpful too. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, is this just free money?
Is it just free money? No, it's not just free money. It's not, it's real money that really does help families for sure. But it comes with a rule book. And I think this rule book or this guide is really important. Go to the source, go to your state, go to the source, read the rule book. Don't just take the money, make a purchase, and hope for the best and find out you're either not going to get reimbursed or it's not covered. So you definitely want to know what is expected of you before you step into the ESA dollars world. And just thinking about, you might not hear the term ESA as much as you hear ClassWallet. So ESA is the actual funds, and ClassWallet is the program, the pay portal, essentially, where the catalogs from approved vendors live. So that's an important distinction. It's just a tool. But different states use different ones. So Florida uses a different one. So if people say they got approved from ClassWallet, really means they're getting money from their state's ESA, and ClassWallet is how they'll spend it. So the free aspect of it, there is no free.
Mhm.
That money comes from somewhere, tax dollars. So that's a consideration, and homeschoolers pay taxes. So that's not the topic here, but that's just
Right.
to consider it. Um, the other thing is that you're looking at the trade. So getting the quote unquote free money, there is a trade-off, and it may depend on how what the state now looks at you like. Are you still an independent homeschooler or not? Again, that's a consideration, and that is on the guide that they can weigh.
Right.
Mhm.
Because I know here in Florida that one of the things you could do is just an evaluation at the end of the year. And if you take the money from the state to use in your homeschool, then you are now required to do a standardized test.
Mhm.
And so that's something that to also look into and consider whether it's worth it or not for you.
Mhm.
So, be educated in this. I think that's a really good suggestion, Gina, and I think that's really worth it. So if a state passes what's called universal school choice, what does that mean as far as money to the homeschool?
So universal choice is just exactly what it sounds like, but it doesn't automatically mean that you then have money for homeschooling. It doesn't mean like everybody gets everything, but
Mm-hmm.
some of these programs, especially if you look at Florida's, you can look at the difference between what they offer for private schools, how they classify homeschoolers post acceptance of any money. And so it's the difference between um, the classification that your school becomes. Are you still an independent homeschooler? Are you now considered a private school, like in
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky, which does not have ESA dollars at this point, but they do make a distinction between homeschoolers are considered private schools. That's actually enshrined in their constitution.
Wow.
That's how they're viewed. So this terminology becomes important, and it's important for the parent to understand what they're accepting beyond the money. Okay. And then you always go back to those guidebooks. The state does provide the guidebook. It will tell you exactly what the parent is accepting when they accept the
Mm-hmm.
fund. And just know that that's what's expected of you, and be prepared for that and be willing to make that choice.
Okay. And so, can you give us some like specific examples, maybe using some of the different states?
Right. So Arizona is universal. Any K through 12 student can apply. They get around between $7,000 and $8,000, and they're going through some different legislative struggles over there. So
Mm-hmm.
when I quote that amount, that's the last that I knew on ClassWallet. But you give up your homeschool status, that independent homeschool status. So that's important to know. Indiana is targeted. That's where I live. So that means it's good for, you have to buy from an Indiana vendor, and it's for student struggling learners and needs learners, those with disabilities. It's actually run by the treasurer via ClassWallet, and it's different from Indiana's private school voucher. So you maintain your homeschool status.
Okay.
Florida's PET program is around $8,000. It requires an annual learning plan and a yearly test, and you formally leave your home education status. So all of those have the same headline, ClassWallet, ESA, but three very different programs.
Okay. Very interesting. I know when my kids wanted to play sports, we had to leave the private school, quote unquote, that was our umbrella school that I helped found,
Mhm.
so it was kind of difficult, so that they would have the opportunity to play under the county. So
Mhm.
we really had to look at that and weigh the options for them, but they really wanted to, my husband also really wanted them to play. So we ended up doing that, not so much for the money, there was no money at that point for this,
Mhm.
but for the status as being under the county so that you could play. So that was because as a private school, you couldn't play for another private school or, a county school.
Mhm.
So while that made sense intellectually, it was very irritating because we're still homeschooling, we're still doing everything the same, but
Mhm.
now we're under the county. So again, you look at those options and weigh them with your family and say, what do I want to do and what makes sense for us? So give us some examples of what you can buy with these funds.
Again, read your state handbook because it will vary by the state program.
Mm-hmm.
You can usually get curriculums. You can pay for, physical curriculums. You can use it for enrollment in an online school that caters to homeschoolers, online courses, standardized test, and education materials. But just remember, like, what you consider an education material may not be reimbursable. So
Mm-hmm.
it's super important to go through those guidelines. I've seen instances where people make a purchase and then they assume because it seems educational to them, they've gotten it off Amazon, and they go for reimbursement and they're out the money unless they return it to
Mm-hmm.
Amazon. But you can't hang your hat on it unless you're sure. And there's usually a resource that you can message someone, or there are some very good Facebook groups for these ESA groups with other families. So you can kind of run it by, hey, I'm thinking about purchasing this telescope for our homeschool. Has anyone else successfully purchased a telescope? And you can share that way. And that's a good way because you can get pretty bogged down in some of these handbooks, but they're essential reading. So
Right. And then some of the companies are actually approved. So they would have that on their website. So, and that's really helpful. And I know Media Angels is for certain states. Okay. So what's the catch? Is it
I
the
think
testing, the paperwork? What is it?
I think the catch really depends on your family. So if, like you were talking about in the beginning, we're kind of the original, we're legacy homeschoolers now. We get that whole marketing distinction. We're legacy homeschoolers. We stood on the shoulders of some movers and shakers in the homeschool world back when homeschooling
Right.
was illegal. And then we had a lot more freedoms, but we didn't have the internet in the same way the internet exists today. And we had the library and a library card, and we had homeschool curriculum fairs and things like that, um, and Yahoo groups and such. So we were really building it step by step, and it was a different type of commitment.
Right.
And now, because homeschooling has grown so much, the family dynamic, the family coming into homeschooling, are they homeschooling for a season? I feel like as an OG homeschooler, I was making a choice forever. Like this
Right.
is how I'm going to educate my kid.
Right.
Today, it could be for a season. It could be based on, maybe there's some bullying going on in school, and the kid's going to be out of that school in a little bit. You still may be homeschooling from religious conviction, that sort of thing. So if you are a family that has a real need, especially in the areas of struggling learners and special needs, some of those resources can really make a life-altering decision for your family about what's available um, to you and what you can purchase with those funds. And if you are a unschooling family, you can get some cool stuff to add to the availability of stuff that your kids have at home to learn from. If you are I'm not going to have the government involved in anything
Mm-hmm.
family, then this program is definitely not for you because there are guidelines and you don't write the guidelines. So that's really important to know. You could read the guidelines and be totally fine with it, but I think it is part of the consideration. So the catch is it's not it goes back again to that status, which I feel like I'm beating that horse, but I think it's important that homeschoolers understand what has come before and what we fought for as homeschoolers, and also living within that dynamic of homeschool has grown, homeschooling's grown, and it's just continuing to grow. There's no real end in sight. And that's a comment on culture and the public schools and all kinds
Well,
of things.
I mean, if I had to vote on what I think ultimately this money is doing, it is to put more restrictions on homeschoolers because it's not giving a homeschooler a choice of what is my distinction and category in homeschooling, and can I have to use a standardized test or whatever that outcome based testing is or whatever your program is. So in that way, yes, there are going to be more, but it's again, it's an opt-in program. It's not mandated, and it's not saying every homeschool family has to do this. And I understand the concerns of like homeschool legal defense, because their whole philosophy as a group has been to defend homeschoolers in areas where there's been government overreach. So I think that needs to be in the forefront. If I, like I said, if I had an opinion on this, and I would not take the money, but I also know that some of the families are not able to benefit from some of the activities that would be available if their children were in a traditional school, like a band, or like the sports programs, or like whatever, art, or
Mm-hmm.
looking into other things that they may, like I remember there was like the space camp, that was at the time $400 or $500. I don't know what it is now,
Right. Right.
so that was not available, to us. Or like the oceanography group that,
Mhm.
worked on collecting samples and things like that. So I do know that there is money. I love the idea of being able to get a tax write-off for homeschooling. Like if they allowed us to do that, we're, again, there's millions of homeschoolers now, so that would be the ideal. Keep your
Right.
receipts, be able to pay, for your curriculum, and deduct a portion of that, even if it's not 100%. And I think that's where, homeschool legal defense leans rather to see the tax credits. But I really want to move on, because it really is up to the individual family, if they should take the money or not.
Well, and there are certain demographics that this money actually is very beneficial, that we didn't see these demographics so much before in homeschooling. That's a single mom homeschooling, or a single dad homeschooling for whatever reason,
Right,
or even working families trying to homeschool, or families who are lower on the socioeconomic um,
right,
scale. These
right.
provide opportunities. And at the end of the day, it's still your home.
Hmm.
And, that has always been, we've always thought of homeschooling as curriculum and resources and things, and those are important. But at the end of the day, it's that time around the dinner table and the moments before bed and spending the time with
Right.
your kids, and, church,
Yeah.
all of those things. So
Right.
it's much more than just dollars and cents.
No, I agree totally. So, a lot of mistakes get made, because I know that it took a couple of years for some people I've talked to be able to get access to the funds.
Mhm.
What mistakes do you see that maybe would be helpful for parents to know about and maybe correct?
I think one is assuming the ClassWallet is the program, just because we offer Media Angels is in ClassWallet in several states. We get emails about this. They think they need to get, or they're in ClassWallet. They don't fully understand how the program is funded, and they think it's
Hmm.
ClassWallet. So it's not. Understand ClassWallet is the program, but the dollar amount and all those things come from the state in which you reside. So you do need to check the handbook for how to pursue funds from the program and what
Okay.
that process is. And then buying before confirming an item is approved. So if you buy something with a no return policy, you could just be out the money. So please don't just hope or wish,
Right.
actually verify. And then not keeping good records. So you do want to keep a record, and that way, maybe like an audit folder, so that if they come back and you need a receipt, always ask for a receipt, whatever type of receipt your state says you have to have. So, and that varies by state too, and it varies by what you're buying, whether it's an online class or a curriculum. And just keep those things so that you have them so that you are prepared.
Okay. And what about parents who have special needs? Children that are struggling learners. Is there something that they can benefit from this program, or is it not applicable to them?
Well, I think that's where the ESAs do their best work. And
Mhm.
that is that, like in Indiana here, if you are not in the public school system, you're not able to access the offer, from the IEP forward and those
Okay.
offers through public school. But
Mhm.
in Indiana, the ESA dollars then make that possible for families. So there are services that you could take advantage of that you may not have had as an opportunity for your family before.
Okay. And
Mhm.
that would be helpful, like extra, remediation or help.
Mhm.
So where can we send them? I think it's wonderful that we have that handout in the show notes that they can download and look at. But where should they go to get real answers for their state? Because not every state participates in this.
No, not every state participates, and some states have, and then they no longer do.
Right.
So that's a whole other thing. But go to your the state's Department of Education, and there's usually a little search bar if it's not on an available window, and just search ESA, and you should bring that up. We will in the download. It has a link to every for all 50 states if it's available and where you can find that information. So that makes it easy for parents. And then you can go to your state, go to the handbook. It's available to read before you apply to
Good.
any. So
Wonderful. Well,
mhm.
thank you, Gina. You did your homework. I appreciate it.
I do.
One of,
Can I say one more thing?
sure.
This isn't just for parents, but this is, I think, was helpful as we pursued offering the Media Angels offerings,
Hmm.
the science books and other things that we have, is that we have used this as a way to reach families that we may never have been able to reach before. And as a homeschool curriculum provider, I think it's a good way to view it as well. Can you reach these families? They have all these new homeschooling families, and we have not had any trouble with alignment. So if that's a fear either families have or people
Right.
who provide curriculum, because your curriculum is distinctly Christian,
Yeah, it
and we
is.
have just not had any problems.
Yeah. And so you're right. It's been helpful for us. And I did drag my feet a little bit because I'm more of the camp of, I want my autonomy as a homeschooler, and we just beat to a different drummer. We are a unique breed of people. We know what we want. We want our children, protected as much as possible. As my children would say, do you want to put me in a bubble? I said, absolutely. I would put you in a bubble wrap if I could, but I can't. So, we have to be able to make the best decisions for our family and, listen to what's out there, do your research, and hopefully this podcast has helped. So again, there's more information. If you can go to Vintage Homeschool Moms, look for episode 581, ClassWallet and Homeschool Families, and give us a star rating on your favorite podcast app. See, Gina, I ask every once in a while when I remember
Good
to.
girl.
Yeah, and I want to thank our sponsor. And for this episode, it's ctcmath.com. They have been a wonderful sponsor for our network. We're very thankful and blessed to have them as an ongoing sponsor, especially this year. So we want to give them a shout out. Any last words before we sign off?
The only thing I'll say is if you are trying to make the decision, you need to make the right decision for your family. Just prayerfully consider your state is asking from you and be informed. That's always the role of a homeschool parent, and this topic is no different. So
Well, praise God. Thank you. Well, take care, everybody. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.